Hello and welcome back to another episode of Teaching My Dad Football, the podcast where we go through mainly just English football, although we have discussed recently about doing some future episodes on Champions League, but otherwise, if you haven't been here before, we're just going to talk about the weekend's results. Mainly Premier League. However, this weekend was a special weekend because there was a League Cup final that was played at Wembley. So we will be discussing the result of that and what that means for the rest of the season for those two teams.
And maybe as a reminder, obviously, as you say, it is teaching my dad football.
Yeah.
I am the dad.
Yeah, for those of you who are listening, I am the son, and I'm here to teach my dad some things about football that maybe he doesn't understand, despite the fact that we've been going to watch Arsenal now for 15 years.
Fair enough. You know, that's what happens.
And he's been on the planet for a lot longer than I have.
That's enough said. So let's go back and talk about
I think we have to start with the
football.
final.
Oh, should we? Okay.
Yeah, we'll start with the final. We both watched the final, although you missed part of the first half, didn't you?
I did miss part of it, but yeah.
I mean, you did miss some action. I mean, in typical Chelsea versus Liverpool final fashion, it was 0-0 after 90 minutes. However, we did get a goal. It didn't have to go to penalties, unlike the last two meetings in cup finals between these two. With Liverpool coming out the victors, 1-0. Van Dijk, I believe it was a 117th minute winner.
Yeah, really, towards the end, yeah.
Which, obviously, it's the first trophy for Klopp this season. He'll be hoping there'll be more. I'm hoping there won't be any more. Actually, they could win the Europa League. I don't really care. They can win the Europa League, FA Cup. I wouldn't really care because we're not in those competitions. But at least in the Premier League, I do not want them to win for obvious reasons.
Absolutely. And so what do you think of the final? Because I thought, in many ways, Chelsea, up until extra time, that were the better team.
Yeah, the first half was a bit of a stalemate. Obviously, I know that Chelsea scored, which was then ruled offside because Nicholas Jackson was slightly offside. But, I mean, Liverpool hit the post in the first half, and then obviously there was a Cole Palmer chance that was saved. Great save by Kelleher, who had a great performance in the final in general. You know, they didn't miss Alisson because Kelleher was that good. But not too many chances in the first half for either side. It was the second half where it came alive a lot more for Chelsea, especially in that second half where, I mean, Conor Gallagher had a number of chances and should have at least buried one, hit the post with one of them, which was unlucky. But the one where he was through on goal, where he has basically the whole goal to aim at, and Kelleher comes rushing out to him, you just think, is it possible for him? If he saw Kelleher rushing, could he have taken it first time, or should he have? Maybe he could have. If he does take that touch, I think he has to take it around the keeper. But Kelleher did really well there and produced another great save. But as you said, when it came to extra time, Liverpool brought a bunch of kids on, and as Gary Neville, to quote Gary Neville, what he called them, the blue £1 billion bottle jobs, because they had Liverpool on the ropes in that last sort of 20 minutes of regulation. And then as soon as it goes to extra time, you're thinking, okay, you've had them under the cosh now, keep on going for it at the start of the first period of extra time. And they shrunk. They completely shrunk. And those kids for Liverpool seemed to just sort of give them life. And, it was sort of it just looked like eventually Liverpool were going to make that breakthrough, and off a corner, Van Dijk heads in for the second time in the game. Previous one was ruled out, which we'll talk about because there's been some discussions online, should we say, about that goal. and why it was ruled out. But Van Dijk towering header near post and heads it in towards the far post, and first captained trophy for Van Dijk. Obviously Henderson was captained all their previous ones, but with Henderson's departure in the summer, that's Van Dijk's first trophy he's lifted for Liverpool Football Club.
So do you think Liverpool win was deserved then, or do you think Chelsea fans are right to be a bit upset about the end result?
I mean, I think Chelsea fans are right to be upset. They should have scored in 90 minutes. However, with how poor they were in extra time, I think Pochettino said after the game that he thought that his players were at that point trying to play for penalties, but it's just like, you've got to recognise. I know that Chelsea are a young team, and people will talk about how Liverpool had a lot of kids on the pitch. They did still have quite a number of experienced players on the pitch, whereas you look at that Chelsea side, and basically the most experienced player on the pitch for Chelsea was Ben Chilwell, who has been in and out of the squad with a lot of injuries. Obviously, he has a Champions League medal, but you wouldn't really consider Ben Chilwell to be that experienced of a player. But across the rest of the pitch for Chelsea, they have, obviously Raheem Sterling was playing as well, but beyond those two players, there was a lack of experience, and it's a common theme with Chelsea this season, not only a lack of experience but a lack of leadership on that pitch, because as good as Sterling is and as experienced as he is, he doesn't seem to be a leader on the football pitch. Ben Chilwell seems to be a little bit better at it, but again, I don't think he's the most vocal presence. And obviously, they didn't. Thiago Silva didn't play, so there's a real lack of experience in that team. But we've been over that before about how inexperienced their team is and how young it is. But with that being said, a lot of those young players have also now had quite a bit of playing time. And while Liverpool brought on a bunch of young players themselves, most of them have barely played. Some of them, it was their debuts for Liverpool, was in a cup final. That's how depleted they were in terms of injuries, especially with Gravenberch going off in the first half due to the Caicedo. I wouldn't call it. It looked really bad, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a challenge. I don't think he's actually tried to tackle him. I just think it's a sort of an unfortunate sort of, he's planted his foot where Gravenberch's also planted his foot, and he kind of just, as Caicedo goes to plant his, he makes that contact with Gravenberch sort of above the ankle slightly, and it looks really bad, but I don't think he's actually trying to challenge him there. So I think the no red card was a good call.
Right. And do you want to talk about the goal that was...
Yeah, the offside goal.
The offside.
Jamie Carragher tweeted something. Well, he didn't tweet something. He retweeted something from a Liverpool fan where it was essentially... I'll see if I can find it, actually. Just to show you.
What is
but essentially...
Is it a picture?
The thing is that he's taken a picture of... signed out. Okay, don't worry. But essentially, he's retweeted a picture of a Liverpool fan. In fact, I might be able to find it on my phone. But he's retweeted a picture of a Liverpool fan who has said, well, Arsenal, they use blockers every set piece they take, and they never get called for offside, blah, blah, blah. And he's taken a picture, and he's taken the picture that he's shown. Let's see if I can find it.
Is he showing that he's not offside?
Well, no, the issue is that they've taken a still.
It doesn't matter if I can't find it, but tell me what it is that you see.
Tweet. So you can see here. So this guy has tweeted every set piece. I'll read it for the listeners and the viewers as well. Every set piece that Arsenal have around the penalty area has 3 players in offside positions to block defenders running back. Not once has a goal been disallowed like it was today. absolute farce. Now he's taken that picture, and you can see there's 3 Arsenal players stood in offside positions. Declan Rice, however, is absolutely nowhere near taking the free kick. And then he's done that. And what he hasn't noticed was that...
so what happens instead in the Liverpool? What happens in the Liverpool case then?
Well, in the Liverpool case, Endo is stood in an offside position, and Colwill, trying to get back into the box when the free kick is taken, is blocked off by Endo, who, when the free kick was taken, was in an offside position. Colwill is blocked by Endo trying to go back into positioning, because even though he's not marking Van Dijk has a free header, essentially, because Chilwell's behind him, who was probably actually the player marking him. But Chilwell is marking Van Dijk, but he's actually behind him. And so what ends up happening is that Van Dijk has all the space to attack the header. The issue is that if Endo doesn't block Colwill off there, if Endo's not there, Colwill probably gets back into that space and either makes it a lot harder for Van Dijk to score that, or he's able to just sort of clear it himself. And so, for that reason, Endo has impacted the play from an offside position, and therefore it looks harsh. And I know a lot of Liverpool fans felt it was harsh on the day. And to be fair, I would say that maybe it was a little bit harsh because typically those don't get called, but it is the right decision. He has blocked Colwill off there, and Colwill has the potential to make an impact on the play because of his proximity and because of where he would have run back into, and therefore correct decision. However, probably the calling of it on other games isn't consistent enough, and you see teams get away with it sometimes. But the instance of that Liverpool fan saying about the Arsenal players being offside and then Jamie Carragher retweeting it was just wrong, because actually then when you see another frame, you see that when Declan Rice takes that free kick, all those Arsenal players are now onside. So it doesn't matter if they're standing in an offside position before the free kick is taken, because actually it's something you see at like Sunday League level. Attackers will stand in those offside positions because the defensive line is not going to drop back there, because why would they drop back? And if they choose to drop back, it makes it a lot easier to score from, because all of a sudden your keeper can't quite rush out as much, and you can put it on the keeper a little bit more. But it also, so those West Ham players were keeping their high line and naturally when the free kick is taken, they move back, but Arsenal players then move back onside as well. Essentially, it makes it a lot harder for those West Ham players to mark those Arsenal players. They can't mark them before the free kick is taken. They have to start marking them when the free kick is taken then, and it makes it more difficult to mark, and it's something that is done, you see at Sunday League level is done. So, and it's just an issue of, obviously fans are always going to, say stupid stuff, tweet stupid stuff. It's the issue that Jamie Carragher has retweeted it, and obviously Jamie Carragher, former Liverpool player with a massive presence online. It's just like, it's frustrating because he's actually a pretty good analyst, but in that scenario, he's just thrown analysis out the window, and he's allowed his emotion to take too much of to
take over. And so in essence, as you said, it was the right decision.
Yeah, correct decision.
Yeah, correct decision. But people are just going to be concerned that this is not always happening.
Yeah, it's maybe not always picked up by VAR or by linesmen on the pitch. So the question will be whether it continues to be called as an offside, and if it does, then fair enough. Then I don't think there can be much complaint. But if it doesn't, then I can understand the frustration of those Liverpool fans.
Right. So,
but in the end, Van Dijk got his goal. They got the win. I don't think they'll particularly care about it in the end.
Shall we move on to other games?
Yes, we should move now on to the Premier League. There are a couple midweek fixtures. Liverpool beat Luton 4-1, but we won't talk too much about it considering we've just talked about them winning their trophy. We will move on to, as Arsenal fans, we're going to move on to the Arsenal game. Arsenal 4, Newcastle 1. Excuse me. I was at the game. You were watching it at home. So maybe you had a slightly different perspective to me on it. Although I don't think many people would have had a different perspective onto it. It was domination.
Yeah, and all the comments that were made on, by everyone was that Arsenal was a pleasure to watch. They were just playing so well, as you said, domination. There was no way that
Newcastle stood a chance.
Newcastle could control. Literally, and not because they couldn't, just because of the way that Arsenal was playing.
Yeah, well, I will say that I do think Newcastle were poor. They were poor defensively throughout the game, and I mean they just couldn't. They were trying to build up from the back, but one of the things about building out from the back at the Emirates is that our press at home is so suffocating for certain teams that playing out from the back, unless you are an elite team at doing it, it's very difficult. And they discovered that very early on. I know the first goal came off a corner and was actually an own goal by Sven Botman, but you could tell the goal was coming at that point. I mean, they'd barely been in our half, and actually in the first half they didn't register a shot. Not just like not registered a shot on target, not a shot at all. They barely got in our half in the first half.
What do you think the way that they play and the result means for Arsenal at this stage? Because obviously, competition is very tight right now.
Yeah, you have to win every game that you're playing, essentially. And obviously, it was a good bounce back from what happened in midweek away at Porto, where Arsenal were very poor in that game. So good to see that it was actually just that game was just a blip, and it wasn't, signs for future issues. But I mean, Arsenal, scoring 4 goals. And we've seen Arsenal score lots of goals recently. In fact, in the month of February, they scored 18 goals. They're also the first team to score 2 goals in 7 consecutive halves of football. They scored a lot of goals this month, Arsenal, and it's a good sign that they're hitting form at the time where you probably want to be hitting form, and making sure that you're dispatching of teams, and not just dispatching of teams by your 1s and your 2-0s, but they're scoring lots of goals now, and teams will feel coming up against Arsenal, they'll feel threatened, especially coming to the Emirates where most teams would be lucky to walk away with a point at this point in time.
And this is probably to mention, talking about the goals, that Saka is started playing really well.
Yeah, he's firing now in terms of his goals. I mean, he scored 7 in his last 5 Premier League games, 5 consecutive league games on the bounce where he scored. So he's the first Arsenal player to do that in 9 years since Olivier Giroud, and first English player to score in 5 consecutive games for Arsenal since a certain Ian Wright back in the early 90s.
So, that's all good signs and signals for Arsenal. Maybe we can... There's not much else, that should be said about this match. Who is anything else that you think is worth?
I mean, I was watching some interesting analysis today by a YouTuber called Statman Dave, and he was essentially analysing how Arsenal now are more flexible in terms of our lineups, where we can form up, where formation-wise we have sort of different formations we use for different games, and actually in the big games we tend to deploy sort of a 4-2-4, which is actually sort of a popular formation that De Zerbi used, which is, it's really good in build-up, but it's also quite good at drawing centre-backs out, because instead of playing 2 strikers, you play two false nines who like to drop deep, so Havertz and Odegaard. So we played in that game against Newcastle with a 4-2-4, where Havertz and Odegaard essentially played as false nines, where they both would drop deep at times, and so it gives those Newcastle defenders something to consider, where because our wingers are now not quite as wide, they're a little bit more playing like what people would refer to as inside forwards. They stay high up the pitch, and because of their pace in behind, it kind of gives the centre-backs a decision to make. Do I go with those false nines if they drop deep, or do I just stay where I am? If they drop deep, it allows Arsenal to create overloads. If those centre-backs push up, then the entire line has to push up, and it gives more space in behind for Martinelli and Saka to exploit. So as a defensive line, you have to make that decision. We either play a high line here and don't follow them into the midfield, or we keep our we keep a defensive line, and it means that Saka and Martinelli don't have as much space in behind to run into, but it allows for the overload in midfield. So it's interesting to see. But Newcastle lacked any sort of intensity in the game. Their defending was poor. I mean, especially on the second goal, particularly, you can tell how poor they were, because Jorginho receives the ball and there's no pressure on him. He plays the ball over the top. Martinelli makes a diagonal run going away from goal, gets the ball, takes it to the bar line, and then cuts it back for Havertz, who just ghosts into the 6-yard box and has a tap in. And brilliant play by Arsenal, but both of their centre-backs in Botman and Schär were just ball watching, and that cutback should just not be, at that level of football, a cutback in that position should just not be allowed, especially from a team like Newcastle, who were so good defensively last year, and they've seemed to have just fallen off a cliff this year in terms of defensive structure. Because, I mean, they were sort of one of the teams that I expected to maybe improve on last year, and I know they've had lots of injury issues this year, but I mean, just defensively, they've been nowhere near as good this season, and you're just thinking, what is, will Eddie Howe potentially be on the chopping block come this summer if they don't make European football again?
Right. So, good for Arsenal. Who else do you want to talk about? Because I'm mindful that we said we're going to try and do
we'll
shorter.
We'll keep it a little bit shorter. I think we should talk about the United game against Fulham, because United are a mess. Fulham won 2-1 with a very late goal from Alex Iwobi. But had Fulham been more clinical, they actually could have walked away with the game. Like, they had so many chances, Fulham, and United. It looked like one of those games where Fulham didn't take their chances, and then, Maguire gets that late header to equalise, and you're just thinking, it's one of those games where United is just going to get a point from a game where they really don't deserve anything, but that's because the other team just hasn't been clinical enough. And but in the end, Fulham broke away brilliantly through Adama Traore, who made one of those bombing runs up the wing and found Alex Iwobi, who, very clever finish, reversed it into the near post, and Anna was just sort of stood there, not able to react.
I must admit, all the commentary that I've heard, that I read about, they were all saying how, truly that the better team won, and that Fulham was really, really good.
I mean, structurally, United are just a mess. Like, looking at them, especially this season, they look at times like they're trying to high press, but then when they try a high press, the defensive line isn't following up. Because essentially, if you're going to do a high press, your defensive line needs to push up to squeeze the pitch. But their forwards are pressing, and the midfielders are pressing, but their defensive line is just staying where it is. And in part, it's because their defensive line doesn't have enough pace, probably, to play in a high line. But, I mean, you think principally they should just be doing it anyways, because otherwise what it allows for, and what you saw in this game, was that their forward and the midfield line would press for United, their defensive line wouldn't follow, and there's just a massive gap now in the middle of the pitch for those Fulham players, that if they can evade the press and just sort of chip a little ball into the midfield, those Fulham players in the midfield have all the space to run into. and their forwards can now run forward, and then all of a sudden the United's defensive line has to retreat, and you just saw them just continually attack, exploiting those spaces in the middle, because essentially United's midfield wasn't there because they were pressing, but their defensive line needs to push up there, and it's really basic stuff, and you're just wondering, why is that?
Yeah.
Is it Ten Hag who isn't relaying those messages well enough, or is it because of those defenders who just are afraid of playing in a high line because they're afraid of the space in behind, and they're not? Is it because they don't trust Ten Hag? It's a strange situation, and
because obviously they're not being consistent even in terms of getting the points, but they're still hanging in there, right?
Yeah, a lot of United fans are saying, like, we do not deserve. I mean, based on the statistics as well, they don't deserve to be as high as they are in the table. Then statistically, they don't look good, and on the eye test, they also don't look good. And I mean, I said that potentially United could have taken a step back this year, naturally, because as they try to adopt a new system, a lot of those players, for one, aren't going to be the right profiles for that system. And two, it takes time to learn that system. And we saw at Arsenal under Arteta, where first season he comes in halfway through the season, and actually came the end of the season, won Arsenal a domestic trophy, and had the league season started when he came in, Arsenal would have got Champions League football. They would have had the fourth best record in the league when he came in for the rest of the season. And then the following season, we see Arsenal regress and finish 8th. Now, they had finished 8th the previous season, so I think that helped Arteta in those regards. But in that first half of the season he was in charge in, he essentially wasn't particularly big on his principles. He was just sort of managing the squad and tried to get them to be defensively solid, which he managed to do, and that's how Arsenal won a trophy. The following season, he tries to start to implement his actual tactics, and you see certain players aren't built for it, and certain players don't have the profile to match, and aren't high enough level to play in that system. And Arsenal were poor that year, especially at the start of the season, but they got things sort of sorted out later on in the season. And I said at the beginning of the season that I thought United could follow a similar thing, where Ten Hag kind of threw his principles out the window last season, and they end up getting third place, Champions League football, plus they won a trophy. But if he was always going to try and go to what he is as a manager, which is similar sort of principles as Pep Guardiola. He's from the school of Pep. He was a coach at Bayern alongside Pep. And you saw it at Ajax as well, how he played football. So you would have expected that. But the issue is that I'm not even seeing what I saw under Arteta in his first full season in charge. While the results weren't always there, you could see what he was trying to do. Under Ten Hag, I can't see what he's trying to do. And I don't know if that, at the end of the day, that the blame has to be on him, but those players, especially their defensive line, they just have to recognise that if they're pressing, we need to step up here. And one of them just has to take the onus and the responsibility of stepping up, but none of them are. And as a United fan, it must be really frustrating to watch them.
On a last remark, there is still a strong possibility that they may get Champions League. Is there a chance?
I hope not, because they're not good enough. There are two teams who are fighting for it. That if a fifth spot does open up, there are two teams who deserve it more than them based on this season, and I would hope that those two teams get it. Even one of them being a team that I don't like in Spurs, but given that Spurs have been a lot better than United this season, and so on merit they would deserve it over them. But if that United team somehow manages to get into Champions League football again, I don't know, to be honest, because they shouldn't be with him. They shouldn't have a chance to actually get it. And that's not me sort of hating on them. They're not good.
Right.
Like they're legitimately not very good as a football team.
Right. Who else should we talk about? quickly.
Well, it was a big result on lots of goals in a game between Villa and Forest. Villa 4, Forest 2. I don't know if you watched any of the highlights of the game.
I watched some of the. I did watch the highlights.
So you saw on Match of the Day. I mean, Villa jumped out to an early lead. They got 3 goals in the first half. And then Forest got a goal back before half time, and then got another straight after the second half started. And you're thinking Forest might have a good chance of maybe getting a result here, but eventually Villa get that 4th goal through Leon Bailey, and they sort of shut up shop from there. But Forest did have a couple of chances after it went to 3-2, and but it was a good game nonetheless. Lots of goals. We always enjoy lots of goals, and Villa rack up another win, which they need in their chase for Champions League football. They're currently sat in 4th place, I believe.
I think they are, and so the result.
Yeah, because Spurs didn't play at the weekend.
Yeah, so result is not a surprise. As you said, it was a very good game. Forest did have
good game for the viewer to watch.
And it was a nice game, and as you said, good result for Aston Villa because they now are still on the run.
Yeah, and especially with United's loss at the weekend, and Spurs didn't play at the weekend because they had their game postponed because Chelsea were playing in the cup final. So Villa just sort of helped create a little bit more of a gap there between the two teams below them, which is always healthy going into the final stretch of the season, and especially because they have European football soon as well, because they will have the round of 16 of the Conference League coming up soon.
Right. Who else?
Well, there was another 4-2 in the league this week. Well, it wasn't the weekend, it was the Monday night game. West Ham 4, Brentford 2. Jared Bowen got a hat-trick. Similarly, in this game, West Ham jumped out. Similarly to Villa, sort of jumped out to an early lead, although only to a 2-0 lead. They went 2-0 up, both goals through Jared Bowen early on. And then not too long after, Brentford did hit back 2-1 through what was a lovely finish by Neil Maupay, player who many Arsenal fans don't particularly like, although he's slightly better in the books recently because his beef with James Maddison at Spurs. So, he's just sort of one of those players who sort of is just there to sort of rattle opponent players on the pitch. But it was a brilliant finish by him. Great. I think Gary Neville said on commentary it was great movement by him as a striker, and then finished it into the roof of the net. Brentford, I thought were unlucky. I thought Brentford were unlucky to not have a couple penalties this game, because especially there was one at 2-1 down in the first half where they're now pressing for that goal, and Kudus tries to go shoulder to shoulder. I can't remember with I think it was Reguilon. He tries to go shoulder to shoulder with Reguilon, but actually doesn't catch him shoulder to shoulder. He actually ends up putting his shoulder, what looks like, into Reguilon's back. And to me, it looks like it should have been a penalty. VAR looked at it and they said not a clear and obvious error. And I know the reason. I think I know that the reasoning that they'll say why it wasn't a clear and obvious error, and it was because it wasn't. If you watch it back in real time, maybe the referee thought it was shoulder to shoulder, and therefore it's not clear and obvious. But it's a penalty, man. He's pushed him in the back.
Oh no, it did look. When you're looking at it again,
especially in slow mo, where you can actually see where the contact is made. He's not sure. It's not shoulder to shoulder.
It's from the back, and I think all the people commenting on that, they all agreed. That it was. Most of them. Agreed
I think most of them said they were lucky to get away with it. If the ref points for, what the issue is there is that if the ref points for a penalty, VAR does not overturn it. Because the ref hasn't pointed for a penalty, it's not deemed enough of an error for VAR to intervene, and so it's confusing to me, to be honest, when they don't intervene in those scenarios, because to me it's a foul and Brentford should have had a penalty. And then, Ivan Toney is very good on penalties, so likely would have gone 2-2. And you never know at that point if Brentford then keep up the momentum, because they didn't find an equaliser in the first half, and then early on in the second half, Jared Bowen completes his hat-trick. And at 3-1, it just feels like all that momentum that Brentford had is kind of gone now. And then actually not too long after, Emerson puts a beauty of a shot from outside the box into the top right corner, thunderbolt of a left foot. Brilliant goal. What did you think of it?
Well, I think it was, the comment there was, it's one of those goals that you'll, in the years to come, you'll quite happily watch
he'll
rewatch again. It really was a absolutely great goal.
Yeah, I mean, Bowen took the match ball away, but no doubt that Emerson had the best goal of the game. And I'm sure that he'll remember it, because being a defender, he'll remember it for years to come. Brentford did get sort of a goal late back in the game, sort of after the 80th minute through Wissa, which was another actually very good goal in the game, but wasn't enough in the end. And once West Ham sort of decided to shut up shop, it was not much. Brentford didn't really create much beyond that. And so West Ham get back to winning ways after a long time of not winning. Obviously, Lucas Paqueta back in the squad, and they score some goals as well with him back in the squad. Such a vital player for them. Very good player, but if he's not playing, they really miss him and they struggle. But when he does play, they play a lot better football. Okay. We'll move on now. I think we'll move to
the Everton game. I don't know.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Everton, who drew 1-1 with Brighton away from home. Another one, I would think that Everton fans will feel a little bit annoyed at the result, because they conceded a very, very late equaliser. In fact, Sean Dyche wasn't particularly happy after the game. He was complaining about how many minutes were added on. But Lewis Dunk got the equaliser in the 94th minute. I wasn't particularly happy, because I have two Everton defenders in my FPL, and I was hoping for those clean sheet points, but they weren't to come. They didn't come. But Jared Brentwaite put them ahead in the lead with what was a brilliant finish, actually. I don't know if you saw it. Another set-piece goal, actually, for Everton. They're the second best set-piece team in the league, behind Arsenal. I think they've scored over half their goals from set-pieces, actually, Everton. But absolutely set-piece, and it falls to him, and he rifles it into the top corner from sort of the left-hand side of the box. And you're thinking at that point, maybe Everton hold on for another win away at Brighton. But Brighton do get their equaliser in the end. And I think 1-1 on the basis of it was probably a relatively fair result. I think Brighton created enough to warrant themselves a point. Maybe they could have even felt like they could have won the game, given the chances that they had. But, I mean, in typical Brighton fashion, they fail to finish their chances sometimes.
Yeah, and I think so. Maybe last comment about this game. Everton is playing well enough, notwithstanding the
and obviously big news during the week that their point deduction got reduced from 10 points to only 6 points. So they find themselves now a couple spaces higher in the table, a couple more points away from the drop zone, albeit that there is another potential point deduction upcoming for them, and potentially also Forest. I think that hearing is in... I think maybe a couple of weeks, actually. It's maybe even a week away. So they could find themselves in a position with yet another point deduction, but that being reduced from 10 to 6 will definitely sort of give those players a little bit more comfort until potentially another point deduction, which they'll have to bounce back from. But if Forest also hit that with that point deduction as well, you'd think that, given that if they get hit with the same sort of point deduction, that they might be okay then. If Forest then also drop points, because Forest have struggled to pick up points all season. We will talk about Palace now, who won 3-0 at the weekend, with their new manager in charge, who I have completely forgotten his name. He's German. He used to manage Frankfurt, and I've completely forgotten his name now.
We'll call him Mr. K for now, and then you'll remember.
Yeah, I don't know why. I've forgotten his name. Pretty sure he managed them to Europa League glory a couple of years ago. But nonetheless, Palace with a 3-0 win at home to a team that they should be. You think that if you're Palace, you'd be saying we need to pick up points here, because they haven't been great this season. Palace, especially in the last couple of months under Roy Hodgson, but 3-0 nonetheless was a big result for them. Burnley got a man sent off in the first half, and from then it always looks like a mountain to climb, and eventually Palace get the breakthrough, and once they get there first, there's not much way back in for it for Burnley, who did get a goal back late on, but it got chalked off anyways. So,
and do you think that the reason why they won is all down to some of the changes that the new manager has made, or
yeah, I mean, it seems like their squad just seems to be sort of reinvigorated with a little bit of life and maybe a little bit more energy. The crowd seemed up for the game as well with the new manager on the touchline, so we'll see how they progress from here. But
yeah, we'll be. I guess the next couple of games we'll be able to tell.
Yeah, we'll be able to properly analyse sort of
exactly what it is that the new manager, Mr. K, is doing with their team.
Quickly, so I don't drive myself.
Oh, you want to know? We can call him Mr. K, isn't it? Whichever way his name is, yeah.
Oliver Glasner. There you go. Yeah. Oh, he's Austrian. I'm mistaken. I mean, we'll speak German then. But am I correct in saying that he managed Frankfurt? He did manage Frankfurt. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Cool.
So I was correct about that at least. Next game, we'll talk about City now. Now I only saw the first half of it because I then left home for the Emirates. But City not really firing, although they did win by a lot of goals yesterday against Luton in the FA Cup, where Erling Haaland scored 5 goals. So maybe they are firing now, but at least up until that point where they beat Bournemouth 1-0 away from home, Foden with another goal, who's been really important for them recently with sort of lots of goals and assists popping up. And finally sort of seems to be at least sort of nailing down that, I am a 10 and I need to be played centrally. I am not a winger. Pep Guardiola, play me centrally and I will produce. And he is producing for them, and there's lots of debates online about Saka or Foden, which we won't discuss today, but I mean, they're both different players. They play in different positions, so the comparison, and their numbers are very similar this season, so I think the comparison is purely on who do you prefer, and that's that. But I won't say anything more than that. But he gets another goal. Haaland again this game. I know he'd scored in the sort of some of the previous games as well, but obviously I know I saw him midweeks. Yesterday scored 5 goals. But before that, he just didn't look quite right. And I know apparently he had, I think a family member, I think maybe it was his grandmother who had passed away. So I'm sure that had been affecting him. But he didn't look quite right at that point in time. But City get another win, which is all they need at this point. And I'm sure that they'll hit that gear of form soon enough. Because actually, if you look at them recently, their recent results, they've basically won all their games since they've come back from the Club World Cup, apart from that draw against Chelsea a couple of weeks ago. They've been winning and winning and winning, but they're not doing it quite convincingly yet that you expect from them, sort of around this time where they kick into gear and they start to sort of blow teams away. But I expect that eventually they'll hit it in the league, but they have a very important game in a couple of weeks' time, which I will be very much watching and hoping for a draw in. Well, both of us will be hoping for a draw because it's Liverpool against City in a couple of weeks' time, which, if you're Arsenal, you need both teams to drop points. So that will be interesting to watch. And it's the first time, actually, that sort of in a run-in where City will actually be going away from home for one of these fixtures. In both run-ins they've had with Liverpool, they've had the home fixture in the run-in. And I know they have the home fixture against us in the run-in, but they've never had to go away to Liverpool in the run-in. So it'll be interesting to see how they manage that. But Liverpool do have a lot of injuries right now, so that could help City in that game. But it'll be interesting to watch and see what happens.
Yeah, the reality is that I think, as we open, is that it's very difficult for the away team to win.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping for a draw. Both teams need to drop points, which would help Arsenal at that point. But otherwise, not too much more to analyse from that game. Bournemouth didn't really create much. City not really firing at that point in time. But I'm sure they'll get there. Pep will figure things out eventually, and they'll kick into gear. And especially with Haaland now, the other day scoring 5 goals definitely helps them if he gets back some confidence in his goal scoring, because recently he just sort of maybe been missing more chances than you'd expect him to. In fact, actually, Foden's goal came off. I think it was a save from Haaland, and it was Foden who tapped in the rebound. And finally, to wrap up, was the only Sunday fixture because of the final, which was Wolves 1, Sheffield 0. Wolves, chugging along now mid-table, getting a lot of results. Pablo Sarabia getting the goal in that game. I remember watching. I didn't watch the entirety of the game, but I did watch the first half, and I've got to say Sheffield's defending is awful. Even with Chris Wilder coming back in, I was expecting that maybe they become a little bit more defensively solid, but they've really not. And Pablo Sarabia just has an open header in the middle of the box. It goes 1-0, and actually after the goal, I think there was a bit of a scuffle between a couple of the Sheffield players, who, I mean, they almost got an equaliser late on, but I mean, Sheffield are dire. I mean, I think everyone's been saying for a while that they expect them to go down, which...
What do you think they need to avoid that? What is that they need to improve? Everything?
Miracle. That's what they need.
Miracle.
They need a miracle. They're not good enough, unfortunately, and that happens sometimes, is that a team comes up, they actually sell a couple of their better players, which is what Sheffield did, and they've just been doomed since the beginning, and they were always looking likely to go down, and they're sat rock bottom, although joint points with Burnley. But I mean, Sheffield have conceded so many goals this season. If you look at their and they 7 points. Their defensive record.
They 7 points below Luton, and Luton has.
Yeah, I mean, they're
of the 3 is the one that's got some.
Yeah, Luton are the most likely to stay up out of the 3 that were promoted. And I hope that Luton stay up, but we'll have to wait and see for that. But they could be handed a big boost with obviously the potential point deduction potentially for both Everton and Forest, especially if Forest get that point deduction. I mean, Luton could find themselves above them at that point. But I mean, Sheffield this season have conceded 66 goals. And I think they're on pace to concede almost near 100, which they very well could do. I mean, we've got them on Monday, and with our current scoring form and their current conceding form, they could be in for a rough night. I mean, they've already had a couple games this season where they've conceded heavily at home. They've conceded 5 to Brighton recently at home, 5 to Villa, and then early on in the season they conceded 8 at home to Newcastle. So you'd expect that Arsenal would go there and dispatch them as well. But you never know. It's the Premier League. Anything can happen. And with that being said, we'll quickly go to fixtures for next weekend, and we will do our predictions, which we did a number of weeks ago. And I meant to sort of look at sort of who predicted the most right, but we don't have time for that today, so we will just quickly do our predictions for this coming weekend.
Right.
Okay. So,
do you want to start with Brentford, Chelsea?
Yep. Brentford. versus
Chelsea.
Chelsea.
Somehow,
what are you thinking?
well, I do like Brentford, and
They are at home to Chelsea, and Chelsea obviously struggled. Brentford have beaten Chelsea away this season already.
It's going to be a 2-1 to Brentford. So
2-1
there's
to
going to be
Brentford.
goals, but Brentford wins.
Brentford haven't been brilliant recently. I'm going to go for a 1-1 in that game. I think Chelsea get a point. All right, next up, Everton versus West Ham. David Moyes against his former club.
Oh no, this is a bit difficult.
Yeah, Everton haven't been great at home this season.
1-1.
1-1.
Although they expect more goals, but
I'm gonna go for a 3-2 West Ham win away from home. All right, next up, Fulham at home to Brighton.
difficult to guess this one too. But
It's one of those games that can go either way, really.
I know, but I think this one is going to be 1-0 to Fulham.
1-0 to Fulham. I don't know. It's tough. I'm going to go 2-2. I think another sort of game with quite a few goals in. Brighton don't like keeping clean sheets, and Fulham can be the same sometimes. Next up, Newcastle looking to bounce back after the hammering against Arsenal.
Yeah, but
they're at home to Wolves.
To Wolves, but Wolves is not an easy.
Yeah, Wolves can be difficult to play against. They'll sit up, quite defensively at times.
But I'd expect Newcastle to win this one.
Yeah.
It's the question of the score. A 3-0.
3-0 to Newcastle. I think that Newcastle will win as well. Not as close, though. I think it will be 2-1 Newcastle. All right, next up, Forest at home to Liverpool.
Right, here is my wishful thinking. And so it's going to be a draw 2-2.
2-2, okay. I, on the other hand, think Liverpool are in gear now. They've just won a trophy. I think they'll be getting some of their players back for this game as well. I'm going to go Liverpool 3-1 win. Next up, Spurs at home to Palace.
Right. This is going to be interesting, right? Because Crystal Palace will have had time to adapt. New manager. Spurs, though, started playing well again.
They've had some time off as well. They didn't play at the weekend.
This is going to be
they'll be well rested.
3-1 to Spurs.
Yeah. I would agree. I'm going to go for Spurs. They're going to win 4-0. As much as I hope they don't, I do think they'll put quite a few past them. And then 5:30 game on the Saturday is Luton against Villa.
Right. Luton at home, they've been brilliant.
They've been good in these big games at home against big teams. They've been unlucky to sort of lose some of the games, but I mean, against Arsenal they gave a tough game. Against City they gave a tough game. They got a point at home against Liverpool, and would have got a win had it not been for a late equaliser by Luis Diaz in that game. They lost marginally to United 2-1. Gave a tough game against Spurs earlier on in the season as well. So I think they might be due a win in sort of this game. Against sort of one of these teams higher up the table.
But
obviously, I know they beat Brighton the other week. I think they beat them 4-0.
There's going to be a draw 2-2.
2-2, okay. I think Luton get a win this game. I think they beat them 2-0. Okay, and then Sunday's games, you got first Burnley against Bournemouth.
I think Bournemouth is going to win this 1-0 away to them.
1-0 away for Bournemouth. I'm going to go for a draw here. I'm going to go for a 1-1. And then finally, Manchester Derby. Well, not finally, penultimately. Manchester Derby. City at home to United.
All right, my wishful thinking here again. Somehow, Man U.
Somehow, Man United are going to sit up in a low block and they're going to make it really difficult for them.
I don't know. I think they're just going to fight. A draw. A draw because my wishful thinking, but with goals, 2-2.
2-2. I mean, I think if City score, they'll win. See, I could actually see a draw happening in this game, sort of similar to how United got a draw away at Anfield, where they sat back quite a bit. But at the same time, I also could see City absolutely blowing United out the water. 4-0 City. City will smash them. Right. And then finally, Monday game, Sheffield at home to the mighty Arsenal.
Right. This will be a surprise if we don't win by quite a few goals.
Yeah, given their recent form.
4-1 to Arsenal.
4-1 to Arsenal. See, this is the point where you can make a prediction and end up looking like an idiot. I'm going to go Arsenal 3-0 win. Away from home.
Right.
Carry on the sort of decent scoring form.
So, next time we're going to check before
how we did our predictions.
Yeah.
And we will get back to you guys in terms of how good we are at predicting these scores. Although obviously I know if some of you are watching, you might keep depending on when you watch this, the results may have already happened by then. But otherwise for now, we've got nothing left to talk about. So we will be signing off. Thank you for watching or listening, depending whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on a streaming service. If you are listening to us on a streaming service and you want to come over to watch us on YouTube, it's TMD_football. Otherwise, we will see you next time.
Next time, absolutely.
Goodbye.
Thank you for watching.